Hello and welcome back to Perspectives. In today's show, we will mark 42 years since Operation Blue Star, the devastating 1984 assault on the Golden Temple. We'll analyse the global commemorations, and we'll take a close look at the digital battlefield, where the usual wave of Hindutva bot attacks is actually noticeably failing this year to control the narrative. We'll also dissect a highly unusual, apparently pro-Sikh opinion piece coming out of the Godi media on NDTV. And we'll expose how state-aligned media uses sophisticated language and very clever manipulation to sanitise historical trauma. Closer to home, we'll address the right-wing populist backlash targeting the Kirpan in the wake of the recent tragedy. And we'll also highlight the vital initiative training the next generation of Sikh media and civil leaders that's just hit the social media accounts. And finally, we'll celebrate the immortal martial heritage of the Sikh people, tracing, of course, one of my favourite subjects, tracing their legendary valour from the Anglo-Sikh Wars all the way through to the trenches of the World Wars and even up to today. But of course, all this and more on today's show. And of course, at the end of the show, we'll take a look at loads of great comments, which have been filling up beneath the video. So thank you, as always, to you guys. Right, let's get underway. Yes, indeed. Today, and then over these few days, it does, of course, mark those awful events of 42 years ago. And it is really, as it is every year, it is a profound moment of reflection. It is, sadly, every year, it is a solemn milestone that marks all those years that have passed since that awful tragedy, one of the darkest, most devastating chapters, certainly in modern Sikh history. And as we pass through this 42nd anniversary, that awful assault on the Harmandir Sahib by the Indian state, the last 4 decades, the first week of June every year has always served as an open wound. It's a time when millions of Sikhs right across the world, both in Punjab and across the diaspora, pause to remember those lives lost, the tens of thousands of lives lost, and of course the destruction of the Akal Takht, the ultimate seat of temporal authority for the Panth. And then the systemic state-sponsored violence that followed those events. And of course it wasn't a localised military operation, it was a structural assault on the spiritual and political psyche of an entire global community. I've seen enough videos and interviews of people out here in the diaspora who were alive at that time and remember the news reports. They were traumatised beyond description, seeing what they saw and hearing through family members the events of those terrible times. You could see written on people's faces the suffering. And it totally transformed the relationship between the Sikh diaspora and the Indian state forever. And of course, 42 years later, the demands for truth, for accountability, and of course for justice remain entirely unfulfilled. As we see every single year, this anniversary triggers a very predictable, massive security response on the ground in Punjab. It's the same every single year. Reports coming straight out of Chandigarh and Amritsar confirm that once again, the state apparatus has effectively locked down the city once again. Over 2,500 heavily armed Punjab police personnel, with 5 companies of central paramilitary forces, including the Border Security Force, the Indo-Tibetan Border Police, the Rapid Action Force, they're all out in force. They've flooded the streets of Amritsar. Massive flag marches are now parading through major markets, bus stands, the sensitive areas surrounding the Darbar Sahib. And of course the meeting, 2,500 troops, mobilised troops. Now the state calls this maintaining peace and communal harmony, ahead of the annual Remembrance March on the 5th of June. And then the day after, the Akal Takht commemorations on June the 6th. But of course, to anyone watching closely, this overwhelming show of force looks less like public safety and a little bit more like state intimidation. Of course, you can choose your interpretation, but it does come across very clearly what it really is. It is a heavy-handed reminder to the local population of who holds that monopoly on violence. Local police commissioners have already issued strict warnings, as they do every year, explicitly threatening mischievous elements, as they call them, who utilise social media to spread what they label as provocative or unverified content. In other words, we control the narrative, you're not allowed to have your own narrative. And that, of course, does bring us to the second, and I would say even more interesting battleground on this particular 42nd anniversary. And I've alluded to it in the introduction, the digital arena. Now, historically, early June, this time every single year, is the moment, the exact moment when the IT cells of Hindutva and the RSS launched their annual, highly coordinated, relentless cyber offensive. And for years, we've documented how millions of state-aligned bots and right-wing trolls swamp social media platforms with a simple, clear objective. It's aggressive, it is monolithic, it is to suppress and silence widespread Sikh commemorations. Mass report diaspora advocacy groups rewrite history and aggressively demonise and smear any expression of Sikh grief or historical trauma. And they do this by claiming it's extremism or even anti-national activity, it's anti-India activity. That's what they do every year. And here, this is a report from just a few years ago. And every year I've actually reported and I've actually shown you how Instagram accounts of many Sikh organisations have literally been offline. They've gone offline for a few days because they've been reported by Hindutva and the platforms have taken them offline as a result of various sort of reports. But interestingly, if you log into X or Facebook or Instagram, whatever, this week, over the last decade, certainly for the last few years, you were virtually guaranteed to see a toxic wall of coordinated trolling, vile hate and propaganda designed to essentially drown out the voice of the Sikh community. A major global advocacy groups like Sikh Coalition, World Sikh Organisation, all the usual organisations, they've routinely had to fight through this massive digital suppression just to keep the message out there, to keep it alive, and essentially to keep their posts being shown on social media. But interestingly, if you look at the platforms this year, if you look at the digital landscape now, something's changed. And I've really noticed it this year. This digital iron fist actually feels a little bit different. It feels a little bit looser. The usual tide, the tidal wave of coordinated Hindutva bots, the attacks against Sikh social media, is actually, I have to say, less this year. It's less pervasive, far less effective than certainly last year and certainly previous years. Now, don't get me wrong, the social media is full of some pretty vile comments from pro-Hindutva people and even just ordinary Hindus. But the more coordinated efforts that have come from, in the past, from the IT cells, they seem weaker this year. Certainly nowhere near as effective. So the question rises, are they now losing this battle for the narrative? This is interesting stuff. Now, for years, the Indian state and its right-wing ideological machinery operated under the assumption that sheer volume, sheer mass, flooding social media and all the mainstream media with state-approved narrative and forcing algorithmic suppression, in other words, using the algorithms to their advantage. They, in the past, have assumed that that methodology buries the memory of 1984. But in that process, they really underestimated two critical forces. Firstly, the sheer resilience of the global Sikh diaspora, which of course will never go away and is only strengthening year to year. But secondly, there's a fundamental shift in how the digital world is now operating. Now, the diaspora has built an incredibly sophisticated, decentralised media infrastructure. When we talk about, and as I regularly do, talk about organisations like Sikh Coalition or the World Sikh Organisation, when they publish their commemorations, it's no longer just a simple localised post. It's amplified by an internationally connected network of highly tech-literate, media-savvy young Sikhs who know how social media work. They've been brought up and educated in the digital world. They know how to leverage it. And they, of course, refuse to be silenced. They are the ones, the carriers, the messengers now of the message. You can't easily suppress a narrative when it's being carried forward globally by millions of independent voices who know exactly how to navigate algorithmic throttling. But also, the structural credibility of state-sponsored troll armies, these IT cells, has absolutely, utterly collapsed now on the international stage. They have lost credibility because of people like me and countless other channels and organisations and people who are calling them out and showing the world, the global audiences, the truth. And global audiences have grown a lot more sophisticated at identifying the hallmarks of coordinated bot farms, of misinformation. So when a wave of identical, aggressive, right-wing accounts coming from India targets any post that highlights, for example, 1984, it no longer suppresses the truth. It's actually, instead, conversely, it's highlighting the desperation of the IT cells and Hindutva. So as I constantly remind you, we are winning this war because just by repeating the truth, showing evidence of the truth, you cannot beat the truth. Even with a wave of propaganda, the truth always has a nasty habit of being resilient and always appearing and coming out on top. So the state is realising that 42 years of forced amnesia hasn't worked. India can flood the physical streets of Amritsar with 2,500 troops. They can try to throttle the digital highways and social media platforms and flood it with propaganda. The reality is the memory of the Sikh community, and now a much wider community, is completely bulletproof now. So it doesn't matter where you are in the diaspora, the global commemoration is as loud and unified and as resolute as it ever has been. The RSS, state-aligned media, and the Godi media aren't just quiet this year by accident. They're quiet, clearly, because they're realising that their massive machine, their narrative warfare machine, just cannot defeat the unyielding truth of memory, of real memories. So the good news is, guys, as I keep saying, the war is being won. This year is very indicative of how things have shifted. And I have to say, certainly since I've been doing it, this is the first year I've noticed at this time of year, when in previous years, all the platforms, social media accounts have been hit with all sorts of dirty tricks. This year, they've tried, but it's just not washed and it's just not worked. So, good news. Now, talking of which, I want to show you, and this is an interesting article I came across. And I do a lot of research when I put this program together, and I always like to read the Godi media. I like to see, what they're talking about. I like to see the latest nonsense that they trot out. As I say, we always do like to highlight misinformation, and I want to show you now. This is just a snapshot of that article. I'm actually going to show you. Let me just put that on the screen. There you go. So this is the actual article online now. And I just want to flick through it just so you can actually see what I saw in the first instance. I thought, wow, understanding Sikh concerns and trust deficit. This is a long article in NDTV, which is a well-known Godi media outlet. Historical trauma, collective memory, the diaspora, trust deficit, identity, language, religious sensitivities. It goes through all the legitimate grievances, dissent, security concerns, Sikh representation in the Indian Armed Forces, the economic anxiety of the Punjab, farm laws. It goes about the agricultural concerns. The Marriage Act even gets mentioned. Diversity within Sikh community, development of reconciliation. All these headings. It even talks about the Kartarpur corridor. Punjab's unresolved regional concerns, hope, innovation, resilience. I saw this article and I actually thought, hang on a second, has somebody in the Godi media, this Ravinder Singh Robin, snuck through a genuinely sympathetic article to the Sikh people through into the Godi media? Because it's highly, highly unusual. This goes totally against the Godi media narrative, which I found absolutely fascinating. But of course, as they say, the devil is in the detail. So I want to look through this article, and I'm going to show you a few bits of it, just a few select bits, just to give you a flavour, just how clever this article is and how it almost hoodwinked me. And clearly it will hoodwink a lot of people. And this is why, again, I need to highlight things like this and their methods that manipulate the reader. So, as I say, this article was penned by this journalist, Ravinder Singh Robin. And on first read, it does feel like a total anomaly. It uses soft, conciliatory language. It talks about trust deficits. So again, it does make you think, have they snuck this past the censors? Or is it a moment of genuine, rare introspection on behalf of the Indian state? Or, alternatively, is it a highly sophisticated, state-approved exercise in narrative manipulation? Well, I think you can probably draw your conclusions before I even go through this. But anyway, so as I say, I just want to look through the text itself and show you some examples. So, excuse me. Early in the article, the author addresses the historical trauma of, obviously, what we're commemorating right now, 1984. So this first snippet, for many Sikhs, especially those who either witnessed or inherited memories of the 1980s and the early 1990s, the emotional scars of Operation Blue Star and the 1984 anti-Sikh violence, described by many Sikh groups and survivors as genocide, remain deeply significant. At the same time, Punjab also suffered a violent insurgency affecting civilians, police personnel and political leaders. Now, if you look closely at what's happening mechanically in this paragraph, the author acknowledges the trauma and even mentions that survivors call it a genocide. That, though, is the bait. It makes the article appear, at least on first glance, objective and fair. But then you need to look at the next sentence, introduced by that classic piece of rhetorical pivot. At the same time, so in other words, immediately balancing state-sponsored mass murder and a military assault on the holy shrine of the Sikh people with the violent insurgency that affected the police, the article is using a very sophisticated technique called narrative equalisation. And what this is, it's a scientific sort of definition, but basically what it does, it reduces, in this case, a state-orchestrated genocide down to a generic conflict where both sides suffered. So in other words, it dilutes the absolute legal and moral guilt of the Indian state and reframes this structural slaughter as a historical duality, a balance. It balances between state security and community grief. It's a calculated attempt, basically, to sanitise history whilst at the same time appearing empathetic. It's very subtle, but it's very clever. And this, again, is all about manipulating the reader. Another quote, and this pivots back to the global Sikh diaspora. And of course, the diaspora is the ultimate major thorn in the side of New Delhi's international public relations. And they will literally take any opportunity to have a pop at the diaspora. So this snippet. One such step was the removal of names of several overseas Sikhs from the BJP-led government blacklists. Yet, an uncomfortable and largely unanswered question remains. How many of those individuals actually returned to India after their names were removed from the blacklist? That question reflects the depth of the trust deficit. Now, this, of course, is all about... The claim is that many Sikhs overseas in the diaspora were put on the blacklist. They were not allowed, essentially, to come back to India. But some of those names have been removed in an apparent act of kindness. But this section is actually very clever. The article asks a valid question. Why are diaspora Sikhs still terrified to go back, even if the names have been removed from this blacklist? But notice, who's actually getting praised in the setup? The BJP-led government. The state here is being framed as the benevolent actor, making confidence-building gestures and outreach for reconciliation. So that failure of trust is very subtly shifted away from ongoing state hostility and placed into this sort of abstract concept of a deficit or onto local police technicalities. So, and what the article really completely omits, the real elephant in the room, as we call it, is the reality, the actual reality on the ground. It's all fancy words that totally paints over the truth and the reality. Why does the diaspora have a trust deficit, as he calls it? Because they see transnational repression in real time. They see state-backed extrajudicial targeting of Sikh activists, particularly Khalistanis, globally. Arbitrary detentions under the UAPA, and the ongoing imprisonment of Bandi Singhs who've completed their legal sentences. That's the reality. But the article pretends the fear is based on lingering old records and just completely ignoring one of the main reasons why the Sikh diaspora, many, are literally too terrified to return to India, because they know what will happen to them in the current framework of the Indian so-called legal system. They will just get disappeared or detained arbitrarily forever, like poor Jagtar Singh Johal. That's the reality that's rather carefully painted over here and totally ignored in this nonsense. And then let's look at how the article seeks to resolve the tension. And again, it does go through, as I showed you earlier, it goes through all the sort of the current topics, issues that Sikhs are unhappy about. And I don't have time to get into great detail of this. So these are just a few examples, just to give you a flavour. But exactly the same techniques are used through each single issue. And of course, one of the big ones is economics. So this next snippet about economics. Punjab should not remain known only as India's food bowl. It should grow into a centre of learning, technology, new farming ideas and border state strength. For this, it needs steady investment in modern agriculture, skills, industry, food processing. Yeah, absolutely it should. Marvellous. But this is the ultimate punchline of this whole opinion piece. And it really exposes the true lens of the Hindutva state agenda. It's what's called classic economic reductionism. And reading between the lines, the subtext here is glaringly obvious. Sikhs aren't actually alienated because of a lack of political sovereignty, or human rights abuses, or the suppression of their religious identity. The removal of their Punjabi language, their culture, their identity that's being driven out deliberately. They're just only anxious about farming and technology. That's all. That's all that matters. And reframing deep-seated, systemic and existential grievances and problems as mere structural economic worries, the article completely delegitimises the true politics of the Sikh community. And when I say politics, the religious politics, it's the miri-piri concept of all this. It basically implies that if the central government just invests in a few food processing plants, a few tech hubs or whatever, the entire demand for justice, accountability and autonomy will just disappear. It reduces the massive historic struggle for basic human rights, but also for the Khalistan movement, into some sort of transactional issue of economics, regional development. If we throw a bit of money at Punjab, it'll all go away. In other words, it's reduced the whole discussion that we talk about on a daily basis, whether it's human rights abuses, extrajudicial killings, the Khalistan movement, lack of democracy, lack of rule of law, etc., etc., etc. It reduces all that into, well, we just need to invest a little bit more in Punjab, give them a few tech hubs and factories and stuff, and then it'll all go away. We're not even mentioning the drug problem. So this article, really, in other words, I was hoodwinked totally by it. I admit it when I first read it. It only was when I sat down and analysed it. Yeah, it is not, sadly, a rogue piece of pro-Sikh information, of truth, that snuck past the editors of NDTV. No, it is a state-approved, very deliberately written, highly sophisticated narrative warfare designed specifically, and this is where it's really dangerous, its audience is designed specifically for educated, English-speaking international audiences. So again, this is why pieces like this are very dangerous, because they try to appeal to the educated, the intelligent out there, the decision makers, in other words, around the world. They're the people they need to persuade, not the ordinary Joe in the street. It's the decision makers they're trying to persuade and manipulate. And that is why pieces like this are very, very dangerous. The state has clearly realised, India has realised, that their crude, aggressive trolling that the IT cells get up to on a daily basis, and I've just referred to earlier, usually, as they've discovered, backfires by making their own Indian establishment look like fascists. So they're being more intelligent using pieces like this. And I did cover another one, not dissimilar to this, about a month or two ago. It's a soft power strategy. It uses the modern vocabulary of reconciliation, trust building, introspecting collective memory. It uses all these fabulous academic phrases to make the state look mature, reasonable, make it sound like it's listening. We hear your concerns. What can we do about it? But it's not. Beneath that vocabulary, beneath that veneer, the core message has never changed. The state security actions were justified, the diaspora's fears are exaggerated, and the solution to Sikh alienation is just economic integration, absorption into the Hindu Rashtra, not political justice. And that's why we need to continue existing. Shows like this, just to keep highlighting how articles like this are so dangerous and to show you what they truly are. They are what we call a wolf in sheep's clothing, designed to hijack Sikh grief and reframe it in a very, very different way. In other words, in their own narrative. Have a read of that article if you find it. It's it's clever. Anyway, right, let's move on. And yes, the fallout from that terrible, tragic stabbing of Henry Nowak has had a massive fallout right across the UK and, of course, internationally as well. People are talking about it internationally. And Sukhveer Digva, the murderer, he's been charged with murder. And he got 21 years, and there are even appeals now to try and get his sentence lengthened. I don't think that is appropriate. I think it's an appropriate sentence, but anyway, that's another issue. The trouble is, it does highlight the fact there is a lot of knee-jerk emotional reaction, as there always is in tragic cases like this. And this is why the law only works best coldly and unemotionally and fairly. That's the only way it can operate fairly. And the problem is this whole story has just been completely enveloped in emotion and anger. And in that sort of environment, bad decisions are always made. So this is why the community is essentially speaking up now and saying, look, stop this. We need to have a proper conversation about this in the cold light of day. And the Sikh response to what happened has been immediate, and it has been entirely unequivocal. Lots of organisations have spoken out. Sikh Federation UK, of course, has been one of the ones at the forefront. They've released all sorts of statements, unsurprisingly, as you would expect, expressing deepest condolences to the family, the Nowak family, and roundly condemning the violence and emphasising that taking any human life completely is against the foundational principles of the Sikh faith. I mean, what more do you need to say? I think this is Jas Singh, actually, of the Sikh Federation. He made a statement that came up on social media overnight.
We condemn this action fully, as in the strongest terms. There's no space for this. And anybody who is been convinced by this or unclear will be very categorical. This individual, Vikram Digwa, lied in his statements. It's clear that he did not intend to go out to kill Henry Nowak. His intention wasn't to seek confrontation or to have any altercation. It happened. They were out on the street. It happened. It escalated. After it escalated, as I said earlier, Vikram had the choice. He chose to do what he did, and for that he is solely responsible. But with that action, it's brought the whole Sikh community into the spotlight. Whether intended or unintended, we now have to deal with that. And we have to now not only repair the damage done, but we have to collectively protect not only the community, but the Kakar as well. So this was an important message that we had to share with you today, because we were restricted with what we could say formally on the television. But it was his choice to draw a weapon and use it in an offensive manner. That does not correlate with the Sikh tenets of the Sikh faith. We made that very clear.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it said exactly what needed to be said. And sadly, despite this clear, widespread condemnation from the whole panth, sadly, we're witnessing a deeply cynical, highly dangerous reaction online. This sort of emotional knee-jerk response that we always see after tragedies like this. Right-wing populist commentators, provocateurs online, anti-immigrant groups. They're jumping all over this. And it's just become another political bandwagon. And they're using this one single, stupid, frustratingly mad, isolated incident to unleash a huge wave of anti-minority rhetoric. And again, the stupidity of it is it's anti-Sikh, but it's also anti-Islam. It's basically every minority is now in the firing line. But specifically, they are weaponizing it. And the frustration I see this online now is the whole Sikh community are being attacked online. I just see it now over and over again on social media. Even on the right-wing groups that I've been reading previously, full of pro-Sikh sentiment, full of pro-Sikh comments. We love the Sikhs, always stand up for them, great patriots. Even now, those voices are disappearing, and there's more and more voices having a go at the Sikh community. So the backlash has just been just tragic and so unjustified and so frustrating, of course, for the community. And what we're seeing coordinated calls on social media demanding a total ban on the Kirpan. And some are even pushing for harsher restrictions against visible minorities. And it's not about public safety for them. It's opportunism. It's opportunistic xenophobia directed originally at the Islamic community, now directed at the Sikh community, because they've got something. They've got something they can grab onto and use as a weapon. They've weaponized this whole tragedy, think, great, now we can have a go at the Sikh community about it. And there they are online, just using it like essentially like a digital Kirpan to have a go at the Sikh community. And it places the everyday Sikh on the street here in the UK in one of the most vulnerable positions once again. So the community has had to unite rapidly to protect its safety and try and correct the public narrative, try and at least regain some control of the narrative that's happening out there. And I've seen all sorts of initiatives going on. This is just one, actually, I found. That's Coventry in the Midlands, as a meeting, essentially just to try and regain the narrative, try and meet and discuss how on earth can we get this back on to a sensible narrative and try and prevent this wave of anti-Sikh sentiment building and try and nip it in the bud. But sadly, it's absolutely tragic, and the cycle of having to constantly be on the defensive in the media on behalf of the Sikh community does highlight a massive structural vulnerability. Whenever a crisis hits, the community is forced to react in real time, struggling to cut through hostile, sensationalized media. And I want to talk about the media in the comments column, because it's one bit that a lot of you have picked up on. It's the media reaction to this. And I'll say we'll talk about that in the comments section, so do stay tuned for that. But I want to talk now about taking the initiative. This is just changing the subject slightly, but it is related to some degree. It is all about regaining the narrative. It is all about building an offensive infrastructure. In other words, Sikhs have always been traditionally on the defensive. They're always on the back foot, traditionally speaking, because events happen like the recent stabbing, and they're on the back foot. They're always having to defend and try and somehow regain the narrative. Well, the way to change that is to go on the offensive, not aggressively so, not violently so I'm talking about in terms of public perception and public messaging. In other words, it's about identifying, nurturing and training the next generation of professional Sikh leaders. Now, this one, I saw this actually, and I wanted just to highlight it. It's in the US, the United States. But this organisation, United Sikhs, they have representations actually all around the diaspora, even here in the UK. In London, they are. And they've just launched their latest leadership initiative, specifically designed to identify and train young professional Sikhs in media engagement, civil rights advocacy, and strategic communications. So it does tie in perfectly with all sorts of other training programs that are being run. The Sikh Coalition is another example. They have their annual leadership training program, which again I've highlighted in the past. That runs every year. I think the deadline is around about February, March time every year. So again, this runs in conjunction with that. Now, these programs are not just casual youth camps. They exist for a very good reason. They are rigorous, professional training camps designed to equip that next generation with everything they need. They need the corporate, the legal, the media skills to handle hostile press conferences to command a room if they're speaking to politicians or whatever. And of course, dismantle sophisticated propaganda that's thrown at them in real time. So they're training young Sikhs to become articulate human rights lawyers, media spokespeople, and political advocates who can then represent the Panth on the global stage. That is what's needed, again, as I say, to regain the initiative. So this torch of Sikh advocacy can't be carried forward just through passion alone. It needs to be a little bit more formal, a little bit more designed. And this is exactly what it is. So investing heavily in these next generation leaders, it is thinking ahead. The community is basically making sure that when there is this sort of knee-jerk emotional reaction from the general public to terrible events like just happened, or when even the state-aligned media tries to manipulate the narrative through whatever agenda they might have, instead they come up against a highly disciplined, highly trained, articulate group of professional voices ready to close it down and basically to regain that narrative. And that is how the community secures the future. Not just reacting, as it often has to do, but actively getting on that front foot now and reshaping the narrative going forward. So, as I say, stuff like this is extraordinarily important. It's thinking a generation ahead. And this is essentially, it means in a generation's time, there will be a whole army of advocates, well-trained advocates who can speak for the community and speak intelligently and effectively. And that's what's needed. Right, I want to move on to my final story. And this is, regular viewers know one of my favourite subjects, one of my pet subjects is, of course, talking about the wonderful martial history of the Sikh community. I do hold it in such high regard. I had military experience myself. So again, it's a bit of a personal interest in military history. It doesn't matter, whose army it is. We all of us salute heroism and salute military honour and capability and skills, whichever uniform or flag they happen to be wearing or waving. And when we talk about this immortal martial heritage of the Sikh community, we're not just talking about historical archives or centuries-old legends. We're talking about a living lineage of flesh and blood heroes, of which I fortunately can report on such a regular basis. And this actually, I saw this, and this is what's triggered this article. I saw this article about this Lieutenant General, B.S. Randhawa, who passed away recently. He was a quick sort of resume of who he was. He was born into a family rich in military history. He was an alumnus of the National Defence Academy. He was commissioned into the elite 1st Battalion of the Sikh Regiment in 1960. And as a young officer, young lieutenant, he was extremely brave, and his valour was first seen in the 1962 Sino-Indian conflict. That was the Indian-China war of the early 1960s. And he faced brutal adversities head-on during, apparently, the Battle of Tongfengla. And his bravery and his gallantry shone again during the 1965 Indo-Pakistan War. And again, his tactical brilliance played a massive role, apparently, in shaping the outcome of several decisive battles. And through all that experience that he gained over those sort of decades fighting China and Pakistan, it shaped him as a leader who then came on to command the 4th Battalion of the Sikh Light Infantry. And my military story actually was in the Light Infantry, the Rifles, as it used to be known. I think it's, again, now known as the Rifles here in the British Army. But he is a light infantier, so he's one of my guys, so I like him already. And he led that battalion, apparently with a legendary combination of fortitude and compassion, so well unto him. And he held the highest command, strategic appointments, and it culminated in his role as Director General of the Rashtriya Rifles, again another offshoot of the LI, the Light Infantry, in the Rifles. And he was involved in counter-terrorist activities in J&K. He oversaw the complex deployment and operations of the force with unmatched strategic acumen. And he was decorated with some of the highest honours in India, the Param Vishisht Seva Medal and the Ati Vishisht Seva Medal. And I'm leaving aside the politics of the Indian Army and Sikhs fighting the Indian Army. I'm just saluting an individual soldier here before any of you just rise up and say, hang on a second, it was the Indian Army. Yes, I know, but I still respect him as a soldier, just as a caveat to that. So, but actually, he was a true Sant Sipahi, apparently. and he did inspire an entire generation of military personnel. And so it's his story really that inspired just a little bit of a few minutes. I just want to just talk about this wonderful Sikh martial heritage that today still stands unblemished and immortalised. Sikh lineage is forged in fire. It's rooted in the concept of this Sant Sipahi, this saint soldier. And of course it's recognised globally, and it has been for centuries, as one of the most formidable warrior traditions in human history. And again, it's very historic this. It goes back to the origins of the Khalsa itself. And actually, arguably, even before that, because apparently Sikhs were so renowned for their military prowess. They were used as mercenaries all centuries back. I mean, I'm going back to the 13th, 14th, 15th centuries, that they were used by leaders around Europe as mercenaries because they were so damn effective. But ultimately, the unique martial ethos wasn't established for imperial conquest like many armies are. It was just a shield. It was emblazoned, it was embedded in their Sikh faith. It was their prowess was essentially a shield against tyranny, against injustice, against oppression. And it was this fierce, unyielding dedication to freedom and, of course, their brilliant battlefield discipline that, of course, brought the British Empire face to face with the Sikh kingdom in the mid-19th century. Ooh, there's one of the battles. There you go. And during the Anglo-Sikh Wars, the British military elite met their match, as they admitted themselves, on the plains of Punjab. They didn't encounter some undisciplined tribal force. Not at all. What they came up against was a highly organised, brilliant and fiercely courageous army. And the British suffered terrible casualties because of this. And this actually is the Battle of Chillianwala, as one example, where the sheer ferocity of the Sikh warriors shook the absolute foundations of the British Empire. They were that effective. And so just like when the British came up against the Gurkhas in Nepal, the British came away from those bloody conflicts with a really deep, profound respect for their opponents. And they recognised the Sikhs as worthy foes. And in the decades that followed, as a result of that, the British Empire sought to channel that incredible martial prowess, offering Sikhs prominent, highly honoured positions in the British Army itself. I mean, whether you agree with that or not, it was ultimately, from the British perspective, it was the highest honour that the British could bestow upon the Sikh people. And the legacy of that elite service carries all the way through global cataclysms of the 20th century. And again, I talk about this a lot. First and Second World Wars. Even though they made up a tiny fraction of the overall population of the Indian subcontinent, of course they served in disproportionate numbers within that Commonwealth force. Over 130,000 Sikh soldiers fought in the muddy trenches of the Western Front, Gallipoli, some of the bloodiest battles in history, actually, well, certainly modern history, Gallipoli. Deserts of North Africa, they were there. They fought with their turbans on, achieving legendary status for their bravery. They were awarded multiple Victoria Crosses, that's the highest medal you can be awarded in the British Army. And they have an unblemished record of heroism on battlefields right around the world. But there is actually a bit of a profound, painful paradox at the heart of this story. Throughout history, and all the way up to today, the Indian state has perpetually betrayed the Sikh community. We know that, it's a fact. It's suppressed their political rights, etc., etc. It's assaulted their institutions. It's weaponised the media against them. You know the drill. It's the same old. But despite all this betrayal, Sikhs have always remained the backbone, the historical backbone, the stalwarts of the modern Indian army. Reference: Lieutenant General Randhawa. And this is the angry frustration. I don't hold it against Lieutenant General Randhawa for serving in the Indian Army. He's a soldier. He's not a politician. He was a soldier, a very brave one. But the real blame has to be completely, and all the anger and the negative feelings that one might feel about all this has to be only in one direction. That is, of course, to the Indian state, the very state that uses the Sikh people and its capabilities despite decades of betrayal. Sikhs have served on the front lines of every major conflict. They've guarded some of the most treacherous borders and always maintained a level of professional excellence that the Indian state has relied upon over and over again for its very survival. The military apparatus of India knows one single fundamental truth. Without that martial spirit, and of course the tactical brilliance of the Sikh people, and particularly the Sikh regiment, its whole defence infrastructure would look very, very different. So this martial tradition is not just a relic of ancient history or museum displays or whatever. It's a living, breathing reality today. It's a heritage of standing firm against overwhelming odds, maintaining impeccable discipline under pressure, and fighting with absolute, fearless dedication to justice. So it doesn't matter, however the political winds might shift, it doesn't matter which way they blow, no matter how many corporate media outlets try to spin or distort anything about the Sikh identity, the one thing that will always remain unchanged, unarguable against, is the global track record of Sikh soldiers. The martial heritage of the Sikh people is immortal. It is a timeless testament to the strength, the honour, and the enduring spirit of the Sikh warrior. And that is why I always take such pride and joy in talking about these stories. And this picture, I came across this picture, and I particularly like this one. That cap badge is the LI, the Light Infantry. And again, this is a part of the reason why, again, I just get passionate about this. My old regiment is the Royal Green Jackets, which is the Rifles. That same uniform. We share a bond, a military bond, that lad and I. Essentially, despite all the changes in the British Army, that cap badge remains relatively unchanged over the centuries of the Light Infantry and all its associated regiments. So, well done to those guys. And apologies for another military indulgence, but as I say, it is one of my favourite topics. You'll have to excuse my continued indulgence in honouring soldiers past and present. Right, on that note, let's move on to our comments column. And once again, gosh, the comments column came alive with you guys once again. Thank you to all of you. And the Kirpan story, unsurprisingly, evoked quite a powerful response from many of you. As I say, totally unsurprising. Killed it core was there, straight in. About the tragedy. It was a heartbreaking, as you say, story. And this poor boy, handcuffed by police, dying of several stab wounds. I mean, what an awful final few moments of life to endure. As you say, they should throw away the key. Yeah, but we've got to be careful, as I said. Justice is always best served coldly, without emotion. So, but anyway, the anger is totally justified. But you do touch upon a subject we're going to talk more about. I do find it odd how the social media is going wild, and they seem to be going against Sikhs on the whole because of it. If the government is speaking out, there's definitely a narrative at play. When it's another community, they bend over backwards to protect them. We all know which community that is. I don't even need to tell you which one it is. Daljit says, look, just keep it real. Let's just not get carried away here, which is exactly what is happening. As tragic as it is, it's hysteria. There isn't any persistent issue of Sikhs killing whites in the UK. If we counted the amount of assaults and murders committed on Sikhs, including children, we'd be here all day. In other words, we are losing perspective, and this is always what happens when we get tragedies like this. Somebody dies in tragic circumstances. It is tragic, but we seem to lose all sense of sensible proportions and perspectives. It is this mass hysteria, this mass pile-on, and it's whipped up by one thing and one thing only, the media. And that's why it's so dangerous. Punjab is on it, absolutely. A young life was lost because he went out. I don't know if he was looking for trouble, but he certainly found it. And as Jas Singh said in that video earlier, he made a decision, and it was a terrible decision. But on top of this, the police actions were a complete disgrace. That is going to be subject to a massive investigation. There's a huge backlash against the police who handcuffed this poor young lad as he literally lay dying, thinking that they were about to arrest him for hate crimes, for racism. In fact, he was actually literally bleeding his life out on the pavement. But why? Yeah, one question: why is he not taking the name Singh? Is he a real Sikh? Why hasn't the media asked that very question? Did the reporters know that he used a combat knife and not his kirpan? Why aren't they telling the truth? As you say, is the media deliberately trying to stir up racial hatred against the Sikhs? And ultimately, your conclusion is, look, if you live in Western countries, fine, but ultimately there is only one answer. Khalistan, of course. But the earlier points, these are the crucial points that have to be talked about. The media. What role is the media playing in all this? I am seeing on social media this huge wave of anger, frustration, emotion, understandably. But that only happens with a bit of ammunition, with a bit of provoking. It's the media that's whipping up the anger. This 24/7 media that we now have is looking to engage, to get a reaction, because that's how it survives, through engagement. It needs your reaction to survive. What reaction is easier to generate than anger? So it makes your anger. Its role, not to report the truth, that's what I'm here for, but the mainstream media is there not to report the truth, but to engage you, to get you angry. TC agrees, totally. As, of course, do many of you. Bhupinder Singh. No, kirpan isn't the problem. It's all about immigration. That's a big comment to make. And we have an awful lot of time to sort of pick that apart. But ultimately, you're right. The kirpan wasn't the problem. And was it yesterday's show? Was it 2 days ago? I gave a complete and utter analytical breakdown of why the kirpan was not the issue in this whole tragic story. It wasn't the kirpan. It was knife crime. It wasn't related to the fact the guy was a Sikh or otherwise. It wasn't related to the fact he was even carrying a kirpan. He was carrying another knife. As Panjab said, why didn't they report the truth? And why isn't that out in the media, that it wasn't the kirpan that killed that poor young lad? It was an 8-inch blade that he was carrying as well. And the statistics out there, I've reported and I've shown you 2 days ago, the statistics, in the last 5 years alone, we've had over 300,000 knife crimes in the UK. How many involved the kirpan? Apart from this, well, in fact, this one wasn't. And that's the truth. But you look at the media and you won't know that. According to the media, the kirpan was central. The fact that they claim he was a Sikh carrying a kirpan is the the root cause of why Henry Nowak is dead. That is not, absolutely not, the truth. The truth is that young idiot, Digwa, was obsessed with weapons. He went out, he got involved in a spat, and he reached for a blade that he knew was carrying as a weapon, as an offensive weapon. That blade was not an article of faith. It was an offensive weapon he wore as an offensive weapon. And he used it as a killer. The lad isn't a Sikh, he's a killer. And all he's achieved, apart from killing a young lad, is now drawn the ire of a whole country, and even Elon bloody Musk, against the Sikh community. It's terrible, frustrating. Anyway, Govinda Sond. The media should focus more attention towards other issues too. All the time, it Sikhs this and Sikhs that. Well, I sort of partly disagree and agree with you on that. I often argue the mainstream media doesn't cover enough Sikh issues. A few do. There's a few notable exceptions. BBC do periodically, well done to them. The Guardian newspaper, they're, I would say, very positive examples of the media that do cover Sikh issues. But unfortunately, over the last few days, all the media, every channel has been absolutely swamped talking about Sikhs. Now, I've a vested interest in watching these. Even I'm sick to death of it. I switched the news off now because I'm just sick of it. Because they're so starved of things to talk about. The 24/7 media machine, it always needs something to talk about. So this big story, it's so rich in potential. They can look at it from all sorts of angles. And of course, the whole Sikh angle, the Sikh angle is full of information that they can dig in, bring in all sorts of people. They can have a go at Sikhs about all sorts of things, as indeed they have been. And again, it's all about whipping up engagement, whipping up anger. It's terrible. And as Awesome Stevie says, from another perspective, look, when other people commit crimes, they don't normally say, oh, he was a Muslim or a Christian. So why do they have to say he was a Sikh? There's a huge agenda. Now, the reason they've said he was a Sikh is because of the Kirpan. That's actually the angle that they're taking on this. But your earlier part is right. If there's a knife crime incident, if there's a murder, as there sadly is on a far too regular basis, in London particularly, here in London, we have an epidemic of knife crime, of stabbings. But they never say, oh, it was a Christian white guy, or it was a Muslim, or it was an Islamic West Indian, or whatever, or it was a Rasta. They don't say that. They just say, whoever it was, Fred Bloggs stabbed the victim, and that was it. So why are they differentiating the fact that it was a Sikh? The Sikh man. Digva. Well, I think the answer to that is basically because they're trying to pick up on the Kirpan story, but then they're really missing the truth. That, as I said, the central part of that story is the fact that he wasn't stabbed by a Kirpan, he was stabbed by another knife that was an offensive weapon. The Kirpan played no part in this story, yet the media have chosen to lie about that. Subject change. So I'm sure you guys are sick to death about this awful story of poor Henry Nowak. Anyway, ZFPV. This talks about the export. One of India's most successful exports to the world has been crime, organised crime. I can't tell you, and thank you to one of my correspondents, you know who you are, who has emailed me links to stuff, regular reports about how India is exporting its criminals around the world, particularly to North America, but here in the UK as well. But interesting, you say ZFPV. Uttar Pradesh, the criminals are actually domestically sent into Punjab. And yeah, one wonders if there's links to the drug trade here. But ultimately, India has a clear agenda to try and push its criminals into Punjab, for all the reasons that we talk about on a regular basis. But also, as you rightly say, it's got a whole infrastructure, it's got a whole machine manufacturing passports, visas, fake documents, whatever, to export these same criminals, and actually terrorists, as you rightly say, into the Western world. Remember Bishnoi? He's got 1,000 shooters ready to go in Canada, or at least in North America. Where have they all come from? They're not native white Canadians. They've all come from India. So again, your point is absolutely right. The greatest, in terms of magnitude, the greatest export from India is organised crime. It's a crime wave. And it has not gone unnoticed by many, many observers and commenters and politicians. The problem is, it always comes up against this old racist argument. You can't raise it because you're seen as racist. Kuldip's back again. Likewise about Bishnoi. And yeah, you point to the fact that India claims Bishnoi is a criminal, but in reality he's a terrorist. But conversely, they're saying Sikhs are all terrorists, even criminal Sikhs. Oh, they were terrorists. So you can see that complete narrative change. Whatever suits their purpose. So Bishnoi is a criminal, but Bhai Hardeep Singh Nijjar, he was a terrorist, apparently, etc. Point well made. And final set, Satbhashan Singh. Hello, Satbhashan Singh. It's always nice to listen to your deliberations. Well, it's equally nice to read your comments, so thank you very much indeed. May good Lord always shower happiness on all of us, not just me, on all of us. Thank you for that sentiment. It's very well sent and very well received. Much appreciated. BK Singh, you know the answer because you've just told us all, as if we didn't know already. If we had our own country, there would be no need for discrimination. We would have not lost our future generation to other cultures. Indeed, they would have been brought up in a nation imbued in Sikhi. No distractions or seductions away into lesser cultures and society or social norms. Alcohol, smoking, prime example, the downfall of the West, alcohol, the drugs. You know, Khalistan will be, I'm pretty sure, alcohol and drug free. And that in itself, I totally support. Great thing. Ultimately, yeah, it was the British who handed control over to the Brahmins, as you rightly say. The wealth of Punjab, the Sikh Empire, was lost, and it was handed over to the Brahmins, partly to Pakistan. But as you say, God decides. God is the ultimate judge and arbitrator. What goes around comes around. In other words, just hold the faith. It'll happen. Just got to keep putting one step forward, one foot in front of another, in that march towards Khalistan. As I say, we're getting there. The journey of 1,000 miles begins with but a single step. Truth is life or death. India is against Sikhs. It absolutely appears to be. So therefore, Khalistan is a must. And as Jaskarat Singh says to sign us off for the day, Vaheguru Ji ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji ki Fateh. He doesn't. I've thrown that in for free. Chardi Kala, Khalistan Zindabad. Indeed. That's it for another day. Thanks so much for all your comments. Do keep them coming in. Do let me know your thoughts. You can email me directly, and I do read every single email. message@satellogetv.com. Let me know your thoughts. Let me know your opinions, criticisms, you name it. Anyway, at least I know you're there, and it helps me. It helps me to know you guys care about the things that I talk about. But let me know also if you come across stuff that you think I should know about and talk about and recycle back to you guys. So let me know in the comments below or send me a message. That's it for another day. Thank you so much for watching. God willing, I'll catch you guys tomorrow.